we are giving consideration to organizations like CACA to come in. If you do, there will be requirement to sign the TEEP agreement as an association and as individual members, I believe, as I understand it at the moment. And currently, we operate 11 regional response centers across the country. If CACA comes in, we're hopeful that they will provide number 12. That you people will provide number 12. We stretch from coast to coast. Shell is just developing one, a joint response center in Vancouver, Celanese in Alberta, Esso Chemical are operating one in Manitoba. I'll come back to Ontario. Union Carbide in Montreal. Looks better on the screen than it does here. CIL in Dalhousie, and Ergo out in the land of the cod fishermen of Newfoundland. The Ontario situation is covered a little more extensively because of the high level of e-commerce. We have my own company, Dow and Sarnia. We've been a member right from the start. And Allied in Amherstburg operate one there. Cyanamid in Golden Horseshoe. DuPont in Maitland near Brockville. And Reichhold Chemical up in the North Bay Center. Those cover all of the province with the exception of extreme northwestern Ontario, which is covered by the response center out of Winnipeg. So the role of the TEEP team at the scene, if they're called to an incident, is to provide technical advice, first of all, to the on-scene commander. By the way, there's one thing I should have mentioned back a little bit. Somebody asked me about Canutech. Under the Transportation of Dangerous Goods Act, if you ship a dangerous product, pesticides generally fall into that category, you must have an emergency response plan. You must have a telephone number on your bill of lading you can call. If the emergency people at the scene cannot, for some reason, identify the shipper, they can call Canutech and get information on the chemical, hopefully on the shipper, and if not the shipper, at least somebody who makes a similar product. But Canutech cannot activate TEEP officially. It has happened. We've responded to Canutech when they've called and asked us at Dow. That is because of the nature of our company, not because of the TEEP contract. But back to what I was talking about here at the scene, the TEEP team will provide advice to the on-scene commander as how to best control and mitigate the spill, and we will provide physical assistance to so do. For instance, if the shipper, or the carrier rather, be it a trucking company or the railroad, has a problem with a leaking container, our TEEP teams are equipped to help patch that leak with equipment to help transfer it from one vehicle to another, or what have you. We also take actions such as building dikes to keep spills from getting into waterways and that type of thing. We're not a cleanup service, but we do provide limited cleanup if it's a small spill. You know, if it's a case of a few gallons of oil or other chemical on the ground, and you can throw some quick dry on it and sweep it up and put it in a drum and get it away, we'd probably do that sort of thing. But if it means hiring a contractor with bulldozers and backhoes, big pumper trucks and all the rest of it, that is not the responsibility of the TEEP team, that's the responsibility of the shipper and or the carrier. So our efforts can be augmented by a contractor under those conditions. The shipper also has some responsibility. As I mentioned, he provides the technical advisor. And this is a person that is knowledgeable about the chemical. The TEEP centers vary in their degree of expertise on various products. Some have a wide range of products, as does Dow, and others are much narrower in the range they handle. For instance, People at the ESO Center really are petroleum people, and they don't know a heck of a lot about chemicals. So the role of the technical advisor is to get on the scene quickly and provide advice specific to that chemical and any equipment or procedures that may be peculiar to it in order to mitigate any spill. The shipper is also, as I mentioned, responsible for providing a relief team within 24 hours. The team is a bit of a stopgap, if you like, initial response, and if it's a longer-term incident, the shipper is to provide that. Now, in practice, it often happens that TEEP will respond and have the things cleaned up before a technical advisor can get on the scene. If the regional response center is comfortable in doing so, then that can and does happen. But that is the choice of the regional response center. And in the event, we have not had any incidents since this came into being that went on long enough to require a relief team. The shipper also pays the cost of the TEEP team. It's set down in the contract at the moment. It's $100 per hour per man, portal to portal, and any out-of-pocket expenses, gasoline, motel rooms, food, that type of thing. This, I say, is set down in the contract. It is subject to change as costs escalate. And the shipper pays what the TEEP team bills. In other words, it's left to the discretion of the TEEP team how many people he needs to send. It's a minimum of 2. Our company prefers to send a minimum of 3. We're not talking about dozens. We're talking about 2 or 3 people. And lastly, as I mentioned under insurance, the shipper contracts to indemnify the response team if there is a problem and the responding team is charged, or not charged, is sued under civil liability. So in summary, the TEEP system provides an effective nationwide response network to chemical emergencies. It is, however, restricted to members, although individual companies can and do respond to incidents not their own. For instance, we had a situation here a few years ago in Sarnia where we got a call from Prince Edward Island. There was a warehouse that burnt down, and in the investigation they discovered that a pesticide, one that Dow no longer makes but used to some years ago, had been involved, and they needed some advice. And I flew a team down to take a look at that and help them with the cleanup. But that was not because of what TEEP mandates. It just happens to be the way Dow prefers to operate. The membership is being broadened to include organizations such as CACA. It meets the requirements under the Transportation of Dangerous Goods Act as a response plan, and the TEEP response plan number can be used on your bill of lading if you're a shipper and belong to the plan. It provides advice and assistance at the scene of the spill, but it is not a cleanup crew when you get into major remedial works. It's generally best to hire a contractor to do that. And lastly, because the CACA is looking at providing a response center in Saskatoon, neatly halfway between, not Saskatoon, Regina, neatly halfway between our centers in Edmonton and Winnipeg. We're very glad to have you looking at coming aboard, and we'll look forward to working with you in the TEEP organization. So thank you very much for your attention, and again, my apologies, Don, for not realizing that this was a panel discussion, and otherwise I would love to have stayed. I'd be glad that at this point I have some time to field any questions about the TEEP system. Yes.
Excuse me, is there an initial cost to joining the TEEP organization?
Yeah, there will be a fee schedule. The one thing we wanted to avoid is CCPA was using this as other people who might be eligible for CCPA membership, using it as a cheap way of getting TEEP coverage, because it is one of the attractive features of belonging to CCPA. So the fee schedule is set up to make sure that the organization coming in is paying its fair share, and that fair share is reduced if the organization provides a regional response center, as you people are talking about doing in Regina. So it's a fairly complex formula, but it's designed with those two primary principles in mind. And it will be an annual fee, just as your CACA fee is and the CCPA fee is. Yes?
Yeah, it's going to take more than 24 hours. We're going to skip the problem with you guys can't handle it again.
Sorry, would you repeat that?
It takes more than 24 hours to get the bill, and he can't handle it. It's fine to release. Where would you find me to take police?
It's the responsibility of the shipper to... Where would the shipper find it? Under the Transportation of Dangerous Goods Act, you are legally obligated now to do so. And what the PEACE system does is provide you more time to gather your resources together. You can use a contractor, and some people choose to do that, but their emergency response plan as filed is essentially that we have a contract with company XYZ who is in this business, and they will respond on our behalf if we have a spill.
Do fire department services have direct access to it at all? Or, like, say, for example, we had a spill of a tanker of some sort, the shipper's been knocked out, or the actual driver of the truck's been knocked out, and the first response team is a volunteer fire department service. Can they get in touch with you directly, or do they have to go through a shipping service, or what?
The short answer is no. The long answer is that, well, there's a couple of long answers. The next answer would be that that would be a situation where the fire department should call CACA. And CACA presumably would be able to get them in touch with appropriate people. Officially under the TEEP contract, it is only the shipper that can activate the TEEP system. As I say, some of the regional response centers, however, and ours is one of them, will respond if for some reason that cannot happen. Yes?
You have to have an emergency response plan filed if you're shipping what is called a non-regulated product under the Transportation Goods Act, but is still a herbicide or pesticide of some kind. But only for regulated products that you have to have a response.
It's the only ones you have to have a registered response plan for is ones that are designated in Section 12, I believe it is, of the Transportation of Dangerous Goods Act. It's a fairly extensive list, but it is that list which mandates a response plan. It sounds like we're exhausting the questions, Don. Thank you very much for having me here.
But before you leave, I'd like to ask Jim Iris to give you a small token of our appreciation for coming here today and spending your valuable time with us. Jim. Thank you very much. You're welcome to stay a little longer if you want to. You need to go, it's fine too.
Well, in case I get lost getting up to the Elmira. Thank you very much.
Very good, thank you very much. Our next speaker, Mr. Philip Joseph. Perhaps you can go through for us a little bit of what happens in a spill. What kind of procedures might be involved from the, say, the onset of the report that there's a spill?
I'm not going to read out all this. This batch of paper that I got here is 24 cards. These are available to the operators at SAC for their guidance in dealing with spills notifications and response. So this has been worked out to a great extent between the ministry, head office staff and the ministry regions, as well as bearing in mind the requirements of other agencies. It deals with responding to the requirements of other agencies, the basic stuff like the fire, ambulance and police agencies, and it also gets into Ministry of Health under certain circumstances, Coast Guard, can detect. Anybody basically involved in a spill. The whole start of this is the spiller or the person in control has to inform SAC as early as possible. I mentioned at the beginning that SAC, I think, is a positive benefit to the industry. No matter how you feel about the spill bill itself, SAC is a useful service. The ministry is spending $400,000 a year on paying staff to man the organisation 24 hours a day, and it's spent already $250,000 just to set the thing up. And it's set up not just for your interests, but the interests of the public too. But it's largely going to serve your interests. It does make it easier to notify the ministry of a spill. There was a question asked earlier on, if I have a spill, say down in Windsor, do I have to notify the Windsor local office of the MOD? You know you don't. You can notify SAC. Now the number that you can call, and you can make a note of this if you haven't done it already, is 268-6060. That's a toll-free number. It's available anywhere in Ontario. It's also available in Quebec, and it extends out to past the Maritimes. It does not extend into Winnipeg. So that there are some truck owners that do have organizations based in Winnipeg that you may wish to call SAC from Winnipeg. At the moment, it doesn't work. In order for us to buy this coverage from Bill, we have to take in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and for some reason, Prince Edward Island and Newfoundland. And it's a matter of cost effectiveness. But we will be contacting those who do have head offices or main offices in Winnipeg about how you can contact SAC across Bill's Ontario. So, generally speaking, dial 1-800-268-6060. If it's busy, dial the 6061 or 6062. We've got 3 lines available on that public toll-free telephone line. We also have other public lines available, by which or non-public lines available, but toll-free, our own staff can communicate with us when dealing with a spill, so that this does not, for a high spill involving a lot of people, a lot of attention, a lot of public, perhaps danger to health, to life, property, you get really busy. For example, the spill at Chipman, we were busy, 3 people were busy on the telephone between probably about 7 o'clock and 10 o'clock at night, just dealing with the results of that spill. And it wasn't our spill, we weren't really directly involved in the spill. The Chipman company was cleaning up the spill, the fire department was on site, the police had done its necessary tasks to evacuate people from here. We were involved in the coordination process, in a reporting process. If we are involved in a spill where the ministry has to clean up itself, there isn't, in other words, a responsible person at the other end, then this would be even more. So the SAC Centre is a vital part of this question of notification and response to spills. Please use it. It's not to your disadvantage. It can only be of some benefit to you, because we're sitting in that office, we have the telephone all around us. You may have a spur out there in the country, difficulty to phone. We will do the telephone before you from spill, it's easy for us to do, so you don't have to let us know. So that's the first thing. If other departments, like the police, fire, ambulance, have not been involved, we will get them to do so. In many cases, our experience now shows that the police are often the first ones at the scene of the accident. Sometimes it's the fireman, of course. But we are having about 20 notifications, 25 over the weekend, or possibly 10 to 15 notifications per 24-hour day. So this gives you some insight of the role that SAC is already performing in the industry. And this will continue to increase as SAC gets used to doing what it does, and everybody in the industry gets used to using SAC as it should be used. We have a responsibility, of course, to the protection of the environment. And one of our first requirements at SAC, unless it's the emergency arrangements that I mentioned a moment ago, is to call out our environmental technician in the field. So that if there is some kind of an accident or spill at Kenora, we will call out the Kenora District Office and ask our guy to go out in the field to see what has happened. And he will report back to SAC, and SAC will take action from Toronto dealing with the Kenora situation. At the same time, of course, SAC might be dealing with an explosion in a chemical factory in Sarnia and have an entirely different set of involvements to deal with. One of these that seems to be not common, and what I suspect it would be, was spills to air rather than spills to land, which we seem to be involved in very good this morning. But there are spills to air that are coming from factories which are unauthorized spills, and unauthorized discharges, and therefore spills under the Act. If that company notifies the ministry and obtains prior approval to a discharge, it is not a spill underneath the Act. But if it's an unauthorized discharge and it's of some significance, here I will mention that spills of small significance are not spills according to the Act, to the spill bill. I can recall if you are dealing with fuels, motor fuels, the normal part of the operation of a motor vehicle, that is normal gasoline or diesel fuel, and if you spill less than 100 litres, then that is not a spill under the legislation. So the intention of the Act is to deal with spills that have significance to the environment. And just to comment upon some of the things that were mentioned this morning about or during a nutshell, about how the ministry will involve itself in seeing that the environment is protected, is it going to be too onerous on other people out there. Well, certainly my experience is that in Romania, generally, our officers are responsible people that have got a lot of experience, 10 years of experience or more, that they don't make silly judgments that are just onerous to individuals or companies or agencies. Now, in some cases, of course, because we're dealing with human beings, we're dealing with individuals, this can occur. There is some get out from this because the process is that there is an environmental appeal that I mentioned that is part and parcel of the Environmental Protection Act that anybody could appeal to of a director's decision or of a provincial officer's decision. And this appeal board is much more public body, and it can look into this from public interest point of view. So there we have the framework for notification of spills, of actually spills response, going out to our person in the field who essentially is not responsible for cleaning up the actual spill of this, and I've seen more about this from other sources, but is responsible to see that the cleaner upper does protect the environment in a reasonable manner. And I ask for your, I suppose, forbearance in seeing that the Act works as it is intended to act, but it is a reasonable manner. but our officers in the field are concerned to see that the environment is protected. And if we have time, I've got a whole score of incidents I'd like to relate how I see, or we see, the question of reasonableness taking place. Just to quote one item, there was a polyvinyl acetate spill out at Nipigon. Yes, about Nipigon, and northwestern Ontario. And this occurred at 1:30 a.m. in the morning. And we called out our environmental officer. It was cold, it was just before Christmas. And he considered, the environmental officer, that because of the cold and because of the known material, that it's a hazardous good, polyvinyl acetate, but he assumed because of the density related to the cold that there was no danger to the environment, because basically it will be frozen on the ground. Now, he had the expertise, he made the decision at that point, and he didn't even go out to the site until the next day. And his estimate of the position was correct, and there was no great problem to do that. Now, you can see the reverse side of that coin, that if you don't have responsible people out there, all of a sudden you get notification of spills, dangerous, it's got a UA number, you look it up and look, oh my God, we have to do things about this, and we have to evacuate, and we have to contain the spill, and all the rest of it. In that particular instance, the spill was just a matter of time as well to keep it up, which I'm sure none of you in this room would worry. So there is some forbearance. Let's see how the thing works. I'm sure that there will be individual instances where it seems to be on us, when we do have some right to feel on this, but basically, we in the environment are in there because we feel very strongly about preserving the environment, and this plot and spill that we decorate is such that we have our responses laid out, and we hope that we do act responsibly moving forward.
Any questions of Mr. Toast?
Yes. How extensive is the definition of a spill?
A spill is defined in the Act as a discharge to the environment that comes from the container, first of all, and that is abnormal in quantity and quality in light of the circumstances. That is, if the normal circumstances is that kind of quantity and that kind of quality of pollutant is discharged as a matter of operation or regular procedure, then that would not be a spill under the Act. But the same kind of quantity and quality in another situation, where it is entirely accidental and sudden, that could be called a spill under the Act.
So it is not specific.
I suppose a lawyer framed that kind of.
So we all have to use our judgment then as to whether the situation is a spill or not.
Well, I think it's just common sense. If it's a really sudden and accidental pollutant, that is likely to cause damage, then it's a spill. That's the common sense approach, and I think that those were just laid out in the legalese.
There's a question.
I had the same similar question. Is that not only asking for abuse? Let's be reasonable.
I think it closes abuse. For example, a farmer called and he said, look, I'm spreading manure on the land, and that thus causes odors. And some of my neighbors have complained to me that that's a spill. Is it a spill? And I would say that it is clearly not a spill underneath the EPA, because that is entirely to be expected from a farm. It is not sudden and accidental. It's the normal process of farming. Now, it doesn't mean to say that there cannot be a complaint from some public member outside of the farm about that manure, because if it's a nuisance under common law, that farmer can be prosecuted under common law, but not under the Environmental Protection Act. It does not take that kind of thing into account. Now, I know that we are deeply involved with municipalities, and questions have come up to do with backwash water with the filters, say, at the water treatment plant. I don't know if anyone knows here much about those wash waters. It's surprising what the treatment plant does take out of the waters that we drink from the lakes, but it's pretty slow stuff. And when it's taken out from the filters, is it you discharge it, and you often do discharge it to the very lake that you got it out from, but in a specified area. Is it a spill underneath the Act? Well, no, it isn't a spill underneath the Act, because it's part and parcel of the normal operation of that water treatment plant. And the same thing can be applied to any warehouse operation. And if you're in any doubt about this, you should just ask the ministry. Look, I'm going to have a wash out of my warehouse at such a date. I think I've got to do it for the safety of my own working people or staff around, etc. Is it okay? And I think that you'll get a very reasonable response. And if there is no danger to the environment, that particular washdown function will be approved, and you won't have any problems under the spill rate out bill.
One more question.
If a spill occurs and you call the SAC, is it still necessary to call the regional office?
No, it is not necessary.
Then who does the SAC contact us?
SAC will call the regional office directly. Now, we're not going to stop you from calling the regional office, because a spill is only one part of the relationship between that company and the regional office. After all, it is sudden, it's accidental, and you might not have a spill for another year or two, but that particular company may have a lot of connection anyway, the normal progress of events with that local office, and might consider that that's the right thing to do. If that happens, that's fine with us. As long as you notify the ministry, the regional office will then call SAC and put that information on record, and that's fine. Now, I should also say that when you call SAC, every message that comes into and out of SAC is recorded. It's a data recording, voice-actuating machine. And we have these big tapes going around all the time. And as soon as the voice comes on the line, whether it's you calling from outside or us calling back to you or to some other person, it's all recorded. So if you're in any doubt about any question what you said to SAC, it's there available for public use.
Question back there?
In addition to the question, the same information that is required to give to them, or what information do you require?
We require, basically, when somebody calls into SAC with information, if the operator is experienced, he will be typing that using his keyboard skills to put that straight into a computer. And we have a form about the information that is then recorded. Now, it's possible that operator does not have keyboard skills or good keyboard skills, and he will just write it down, and after the call is over, he would put it back into the electronic machines. What we do require is obviously the name of the caller, the company that is involved, the type of chemical that is spilled, the location, what is being done about it, what agencies have been informed, and we would take it from there. It's possible that the caller does not know the name of the chemical concerned in the spill. We do have the possibility of trying to trace that chemical and to ascertain what precisely it is. If it's dangerous goods, then of course it's placarded then we can get the UN number or the NA number, and everything will flow from that, because the book dealing with these hazardous materials is quite explicit about public danger and gives you guidance on clean-up and preventative measures. If the chemical is unknown, we do have problems, of course, and we will no doubt contact CANUTEC, and possibly, if it's a trans-boundary incident, also contact the US authorities. Certainly, in many cases, we will need to contact the Coast Guard. SAC has these facilities to do just that.
One question I have: if this was a spill that occurred during transit or otherwise should be regulated under the Transportation of Dangerous Goods Act, they would call the police officer, I guess, first in Ontario. Is that right? When they get in touch with you?
Yes. We have, all the police units have notification of SAC number, and that when they have done any emergency work that is required, that they should call SAC.
So if you had a spill in a truck, for example, you would call the police, and would you still have to call? Should you still call SAC, or would that be like that?
I would say it's prudent for that caller to call SAC as well as the police. Now, if everything works perfectly and the police do inform us of the incident, that's fine and dandy. But again, policemen are only human. They may have other incidents to deal with, and they just might forget about it. It's not an absolutely legal requirement for the police to call SAC, but it is a requirement for the spiller to notify the ministry. So it would be prudent for you to make those two telephone calls.
So under the regulations, if a truck driver were to call the police first, and then call his employer, and then eventually would get to the shipper, and the shipper should really call the SAC.
If that happened, that would be okay. In fact, that happened quite recently just outside of Kenora, where a trucker in Ontario had an accident. He called the police, and that was fine and dandy. And then he called his chief office, which was in Winnipeg. Now, Winnipeg tried to call SAC, and as I mentioned before, could not call SAC on the 1-800 line. It could have called SAC on just a normal pay telephone. However, the industry in that particular case didn't do so. What it did was just call the office, the Kenora office of the MOE, and the Kenora office of the MOE notified SAC. So, common sense, that's all that needs to be applied for the thing to work.
Take one more question.
I'm wondering how you decide whether to evacuate an area, how large an area you decide, how you decide how large an area to evacuate, maybe the cost of that evacuation is the fact that how large an area needs to be evacuated.
That evacuation is decided on the basis of health. The medical officer of health will be deeply involved in any decision relating to evacuation. The police will be there to enforce that decision. The Ministry of Environment are not involved directly in the evacuation of people. We did not become involved in the recent evacuation at Stony Creek, for example. The police did order that evacuation, some are even saying unwisely so at this point in time. But they did order that on the basis of information received from the local medical officer of health that said that this was a dangerous good and would cause intense irritation to the skin and eyes and maybe lasting damage to tissues. I think they made a prudent decision to evacuate in that instance. The Ministry of Environment would become involved at a later stage in regard to the quality of air. So we do have air quality monitoring equipment. So for an accident of this nature, where there is discharge to the air and evacuation is either being considered or being expanded or even being curtailed, they will ask the ministry, well, what does your monitoring instrument show? and we will obviously do our best to supply that information.
Okay.
Going back to your example, about a situation where there was a spill, the ministry officer was notified of the spill, there was a decision called from the ministry personnel not to go to that evening. What would have happened would have been more hazardous than it actually was. Who would have been responsible for that particular situation?
Well, again, if it's a hazardous material under the transportation of dangerous goods act, then the police have to be notified. The difference between the DGGA and the EPA is basically one of health. If it's a danger to people, then it's the police, the route is basically the police, the Ministry of Health, Medical Officer of Health as first priority. If it's danger to environment, then environment is the first priority.
Last thing is, within a couple of hours, that spill precipitates today, it costs a couple $100.
Yes.
But within 12 or 18 hours, it's going to spread.
Yes.
It costs thousands of dollars.
Yes.
Who would have been responsible in that situation?
Well, if I was the environmental officer involved, I would certainly have my face red, or white if it happens, because that substance is white. You wouldn't want to fancy yourself in that position where you've made a judgment and that judgment turns out to be erroneous.
Truckers responsible.
The spiller is responsible. That's true. At this time, the trucker is there on scene. Maybe he's hurt, and he cannot do anything. But nonetheless, the trucker is there. The responsibilities have been given to nobody else at this point in time. So you can say under the law, the trucker is responsible to clean up wherever the environmental technician is or whatever he said. At this point, that environmental technician's knowledge is advice only to the spiller. Now, if that spiller had said to the ministry one way or another, look, I cannot clean up, I'd like your assistance to clean up, well, I think that is different. We have different responsibilities under that law.
I think we should.
In that scenario, if it was an owner-operator, you know, that truck and trailer is dead, it's still responsible. They go after the estate. Under the terms of this legislation, the trucker is always responsible. Nobody else. No matter what the MOE says, the trucker is responsible.
Okay, I think we'll carry on the program. Mike, I can call on you again to enlighten us on what the Ontario Trucking Association is doing on the safe transportation of our truckers.
Well, we're doing all sorts of things in the safe transportation of materials. Since the spill, we've mainly panicked, frustrated. Sometimes I've been dealing with the ministry director since 1979 or 78, I guess when it was first talked about, and I have a high level of frustration with dealing with some people in the ministry. They're all very capable people. But it's kind of like a very dear friend of the trucking industry who's been on leave of absence for the last couple of years. You know him, Jimmy Hopper. He used to say, I sometimes make mistakes, but I'm never wrong. I kind of think that that's what we've got here. A couple of mistakes, but nobody will admit fault. I'm not here to discuss, or I'm not supposed to discuss this afternoon the problems of the spill. I'm supposed to be a little more positive and talk about what we're doing about ensuring that we're handling products safely, so I'll get into that. Well, maybe before I get into that, we'll talk about the spills. The problem with this bill is that it doesn't get to the root of the problem. The problem is that we've got to have spill prevention in this province, in this country. program put together where we'll have responsible carriers legislated to prevent spills. What this bill does is it adopts the philosophy of deep pockets. If you profit from the production or carriage of dangerous goods, you're going to pay, regardless of fault. But there is a deep ingrained belief by the ministry and the government that if you're making a buck out of chemicals, then you're going to pay. It's as simple as that. They kind of forget that the consumers want this stuff. I challenge anybody in this room to go look in their wife's closet where she keeps her cleaning chemicals and just kind of take a look at what she's got there. Same stuff that's regulated. Seems to me that people want this stuff. If anybody should pay, the user should pay. Enough of that. This country's got an enviable safety record in truck transportation of dangerous goods. Heard some numbers today of, I think, 630 spills in 1983 and perhaps 784 and the same thing in 85. And even though the phones aren't working in East York, it looks like it's doubled through strategic error of SAC. I don't know what the hell we did for SAC. But obviously, this industry has been a very, very poor performer in the eyes of some people. In any event, we do have an enviable record in comparison to the south of the border of the United States. I'm not suggesting that the U.S. citizens are being irresponsible. It's just a question of road conditions, the type of traffic that we're involved in, deregulation in the U.S., different emphasis on insurance down there, their risk management programs. We've been a little more prepared, I think, we've prepared ourselves over the last couple of years to deal with things like spills, rolling transportation, and dangerous goods. Versus the States, which is a little more entrepreneurial and you have a lot more independent owner-operators and that type of operation. They tend to, if you read the press, you very seldom see spectacular accidents in Canada. The last that I can really recall was that fire on the 401 when someone cut off a petroleum truck and the thing blew up. But almost daily, I travel to the States quite a bit, and almost daily you can pick up any newspaper from the States and see spectacular tank wreck accidents. So they do have a little different degree of problem. So I would suggest that in this country, the truckers have been very responsible over the years. We do have our problems, we do have spills, and we do have accidents, we do have irresponsible operators, but generally they've been cleared out by the responsible shipping community who won't deal with them. Last summer, the Transportation of Dangerous Goods Act was passed, and it kind of cleaned up a hodgepodge of federal and provincial regulations that we've been living under for a good number of years. Some of them were effectively enforced, some were not. In the province of Ontario, the Gasoline Handling Act was the Bible for petroleum carriers. Very strictly enforced. The Ontario Petroleum Association was actively involved in adjusting those regulations on an ongoing basis. But other than that, there weren't any clear, defined regulations governing the transportation of dangerous goods in this country. Most tank trailer manufacturers and most responsible carriers, regardless of size, adopted Title 49 U.S. Department of Transportation Title 49 regulations and have been using them for a good number of years. Our tanks basically in Canada are built to those specifications, pre-dangerous goods. That the operating conditions of the carriers, most of them most carriers in Canada do operate south of the border and adopted their operational requirements in Title 49. So we did have a fairly consistent set of non-regulations within the country. But about 15 years ago, carrier industry got a little upset with what we call competitive inequities, and that responsible carriers who adopted Title 49 as their operating guideline were being outbid by irresponsible carriers that were hauling sulfuric acid and milk tanks. And we went to the federal government 15 years ago and we said to them, you know, we should do something about this. Why don't we take this piece of legislation that we got in the States, adapt it to the Canadian needs, and we'll have a Dangerous Goods Act. Well, 15 years ago, as you recall, and I suppose to some extent today, we were pretty fiercely loyal. And it would never do under that administration to take a good piece of legislation from a foreign country and adapt it to Canada. We better start from scratch and rewrite the sucker. So 15 years later, we have Transportation of Dangerous Goods. The reason it took so long was not because of the feds, I'm not trying to bash them. It's not because the feds held it up, it's because we held it up. this industry, trucking industry, the chemical producers, the receivers, the OMAs, the CMAs, I should say. We held it up because we wanted a good piece of legislation. And for once, the government listened. And we worked at it, and we worked at it, and we worked at it, and our expense from the Ontario Trucking Association is well into the millions of dollars. But what we ended up with was what I think a pretty responsible, pretty decent piece of legislation that's had some, I'm not sure, but I think it's over 100 amendments since July 1st. And the reason they've had over 100 amendments since July 1st of legislation is because they're listening. You've got a problem with the Dangerous Goods Act, you call Duncan Ellison or his people in Transport Canada in Ottawa, you tell them what the problem is, you'll investigate the problem, if you see the discrepancy in the act, you change it. It's obvious that when you get together with government agencies, and they're willing to sit down and listen to you, that you can end up with some good legislation. A couple of years ago, the Ontario Waste Manufacturers, or the Ontario Waste Haulers Association, which is a division of the OTA, sat down with the Ministry of the Environment, and over a period of, I think, about 2 years, hammered out the Ontario, perhaps you can give me the exact name, the Waste Management Corporation. And they worked very closely with them. Again, a long process, but again, probably something that will be very effective in this province. I think that we got treated very poorly with the spills bill, in that the regulations, although effective on November 29th, weren't issued to the public until December. Matter of fact, I got my copy from the Ministry of Transport, of all people. It sent it to me by courier as it came off the press on December the 2nd. We had no chance to take a look at those regulations after they were published, and it's the first piece of legislation I personally have ever been involved in this country that the government has not allowed the participating industries to look at prior to publication. We haven't always been successful when we looked at them, but at least we had a shot at looking at them. The consultative process works. When the government wants to talk to you and they want to sit down and listen and construct reasonable legislation, it works. That's what this bill will allow. As you probably know, the trucking industry is one of the most regulated industries in the country. We've got everything from the normal course of general business acts, like the Income Tax Act, the Business Corporations Act, whatever. Plus, we've got the Public Commercial Vehicles Act, Environmental Protection Act, Motor Transport Act of Canada, Transportation and Dangerous Goods Act, goes on and on and on. Highly regulated. We are not in favor, we are in favor of good regulations. We are in favor, and we're here to talk about spill prevention, we are in favor of producing legislation that will encourage shippers and carriers to be responsible and to act in the public's best interest. So what is the trucking industry doing about this? Well, in fact, because we agree with the concepts of the spills bill, for instance, the trucking industry has taken a responsible position with their carrier members on training courses for the transportation of dangerous goods, and I think some of the people in this room have probably attended them. And in fact, since about May of last year, when the training courses started, we've trained in excess of 8,000 people in this province and have issued in excess of 35,000 handbooks on the transportation of dangerous goods. So virtually by mid-July, all carriers in this province were well versed and their drivers were certified under the Transportation of Dangerous Goods Act. If I was sitting in your shoes right now, and I was having to hire carriers, or I had some responsibility to hire carriers, the thing I would be looking for most is, number one, is insurance, but number two is spill contingency plan. There are some key elements to spill contingency plans, and if any shipper or receiver, anybody that's got anything to do with hiring outside carriers, does not question his carrier about what his spill contingency plan is, they're advocating a responsibility. We have too many carriers running around this country right now that are relying on the services of SAC, CACA, and T, to name just but a few. There's other organizations as well, and not taking it upon themselves to become responsible. Every driver has to be trained. Certification process on the transportation of dangerous goods, at this point in time, although a very, very good training program, is virtually a rubber stamp because so many people have to get trained in this country in such a short period of time. I suggest in the future that training program will be expanded and the course will be a lot tougher. But we did have to kind of grandfather everybody that was in there, take a cursory exam and training course. That is not emergency response, and that is not proper training. When questioning the carrier, you should be asking them, what do you do in the event of? Do you have driver training in-house? Do you have a team commander, as was pointed out in TEEP? Who do you contract out for spill cleanup? Do you do that in-house? With extended liability, or downstream liability as I call it, and I don't know much about liability, that's why Ellie Gagne's here, I would suggest to you that you're going to be on the hook as much as the carrier is in the future with the higher settlements that are being awarded, of course, in the limited amount of liability insurance that the carriers have. So it's in your best interest to sit down with your carriers and talk to them about the emergency response program. I don't want to be up here too long, so I'm going to skip over a few things, but under the Transportation of Dangerous Goods Act, just about everything that you people are involved in is covered under it. But the thoroughness and breadth of that act includes everything from prescription drugs to laundry, bleach to whatever. I think some people in this room, and I'm a tank truck operator, as you know, but I do represent the association, and I am very close to a lot of our driver friends. One of the problems that the carriers have experienced since the enactment of the Transportation of Dangerous Goods Act was that carriers decided that the economic realities of going through the training process, retrofitting the trailers for placards, the insurance issue for the limited amount of chemicals that they haul, they decided to get out of it. So I think you'll find there was a question earlier about surcharges on freight for dangerous goods. I'd almost suggest to you that if you're dealing with carriers that are surcharging freight for dangerous goods, that you've got a serious question on whether you can handle it. So a lot of carriers really don't want to be involved in it. And the surcharge is their way of saying, don't give me the load. A couple other points I want to make about the spills bill. Philip mentioned earlier this morning that the committee that was charged, Professor Manzig's committee, who by the way is now, I guess, on this Environmental Compensation Corporation, is also the guy that headed the committee to examine this legislation back in the summer. They met for a couple of weeks and they listened to I don't know how many people, but this is what everybody in this province went on. He says that their report recommended a whole bunch of changes and the government enacted 50 of them. Well, I suggest to you that you look at the 50 changes. The vast majority of them weren't recommended by the committee. The vast majority of those 50 changes are wording changes. Things like adding a comma, adding a word. There's one particular section that read, where the person does not reside in the province of Ontario, now is changed to where a person is not normally a resident of the province of Ontario. Those are the 50 changes. I'm suggesting to you that the committee was a sham, that no substantive changes were made other than increasing the deductible from $1 million to $1 million plus 10% of your assets. Of all the people that document, everybody suggested that be reduced. Another point about carriers and the spills bill is that this $1 million deductible applies to one and all. I represent a fairly large organization and we have a fairly large asset base and we can probably handle one or two $1 million accidents. I wouldn't want to get handled last time, but we can probably handle one or two of them. But that $1 million deductible also applies to the guy that's got 2 trucks. And I'm here to tell you, you can't handle it. I think we talked about non-vehicular accidents and the insurance pool that the government decided to set up some time ago that right now is set up but doesn't have any money or something, it's not offering insurance. And it doesn't apply to truckers, although Alan O'Donnell originally let us believe that it did. I'd also suggest to you that if that insurance is ever made available, and my money is saying that it will never be made available, but I could be wrong, that you seriously look at the impact it's going to have on you, because the $1 million in the double claim thing and the amount of rules and regulations that some of the insurers are talking that the government wants to have in them would make it probably unreasonable for you to consider it. That's only a suggestion. I haven't seen the final deal from them. Government is also used, and I've heard it today, used at Kenora the PCB spill in Kenora is probably the biggest spill that's ever occurred in the province of Ontario, maybe in Canada. I'm not sure that small amount of PCBs was spilled on the Trans-Canada Highway, and they decided to rip it up. And I guess it's into, from the press reports, I don't have exact knowledge, but I think it's over $3 million now. That's just, how much? $1.5 million. And they ripped the highway twice. A ministry official shortly after that spill occurred said in the press that a rat could lick the entire length of Trans-Canada Highway and still be all right. Now, but they ripped it up twice. And this was before SAC. Now we got SAC. There was also some mention today about New York and New Jersey. I made a note about it. And I'm not so sure what that's got to do with Ontario, but I will say this about the states that our company operates in. They do not, on the whole, especially the northeastern states, which I'm directly responsible for, on the whole have this type of legislation, still take legislation. They certainly have environmental legislation, and they're certainly very, very, very strict. But what's wrong with that? I don't mind New York being strict with me if I was a film. I don't mind them grounding my unit. We want to be responsible. And all New York will do is, after they ground the unit and maybe fix the patch in the trailer or whatever you've done to them, or you've had your spill and you cleaned it up, all they'll do is charge you for the farmer. And they'll let you go fight it out in the court of the land. You're not absolutely liable. You do all the normal things that common law allows you to do. But they are tough, and it works down there. Used to be that way here. My last point is that I'm not sure why the spills bill was enacted in 1985. I have ideas. I think that with some political pressures and decided it's about time this thing got off the table. Maybe it's been sitting around since 1979 and ought to go with the spills bill. But I don't know that we've had a problem in the past. You know, the innocent third-party compensation. How many people in this room can tell me that they've heard of problems, we've seen press reports about innocent third parties not getting paid because of the spill? I'm in the industry and I don't know of any. Perhaps with the exception of the Mississauga train development, which gets, the courts are involved, and that's a hell of a mess. But you wouldn't institute this type of legislation because of a massive train development that's never happened since. I just don't know of any. I'm sure that there are some people out there that have been compensated, but it doesn't seem to be a big issue. Also don't understand why the biggest pollution problem in my mind that we've got in this province today is probably Lake Ontario. But you can't swim there. Yet they're exempt. Not sewage goes in there, they're exempt. Ontario Hydro is exempt. Two big polluters. Is that constitutionally fair? I doubt it. That's all I've got to say.
Thank you very much. Any questions?
I don't know how I follow Mike after his presentation. It makes it kind of difficult for somebody like me. I think we share many of Mike's concerns. We have worked closely with OTA, OPA, CCTA, a number of other organizations. And, we do see many of the points that OTA is making. Federation, as you know, is a lobby organization. And, we were asked to say what we're doing to promote safe handling of pesticides, that type of thing. We're new to this. This particular piece of legislation, you know, it's just enacted, and we are a lobby organization, so we don't have the type of, we don't have teeth, we don't have the expertise that would be in this room. Most of our people, I know some of you are even farmers, most farmers have been taking a certification course. Safe handling of pesticides, herbicides, insecticides. You're probably the elite right here. In fact, a survey done by our organization a year and a half ago on labor issues found that chemical handling ranked number 1 among the farm population we were able to survey as the priority issue. Yet there's nothing in place that offers courses on a widespread basis, considered effort to train farmers. It's going to be an area we're looking at right now. We're trying to think of strategies that perhaps we can put in place. We may be going to the Ministry of Environment for funding. We may be coming to CACA to assist us in putting on seminars and training programs throughout the province, because farmers are going to have greater skills. They are going to have to treat chemicals with a little higher regard than perhaps they have in the past. 2 comments I would like to make, and it came up from Mike and Bill. This appeal process. Comment was made that there's no appeal. There is appeal on a director's order or an officer's order, and that's true. There's no appeal to a ministry's order. The ministry can make an order in this legislation. The other comment Mike made was the user, I think he said the user concern, consumer should pay. And we're going to pay, there's no question about that. We're already going to pay through the higher insurance rate. What we'd rather see, though, is the polluter pay. And I think this legislation is really missing the vote, that it's going to be on individuals like ourselves and the end user of any of the products. We're going to be paying. Maybe paying 6 or 8% on your product, plus $80 a year for the insurance to start, but it's going to add significantly to our costs. $4 or $5 million a year is significant in the agricultural industry. You have a problem, some of you, no doubt, are custom operators, agricultural custom operators. It's going to be a problem with you, because under the legislation, if you're a custom operator and you're a farmer, you have unlimited liability. If you're moving goods from one of your neighbor's farms, chemical, you have a spill. This $500,000 doesn't apply to you. Now, granted, most agricultural spills are going to fall way under that, probably the $10,000 range. But if they don't, if you're moving some of it, and there is a major spill, you contaminate a stream or a Grand River or whatever, and there's going to be major damages. Don't look to the $500,000 as your cap, because if you're a custom operator, you have no cap. We're advising our members to very carefully look at the purchase agreements. We've already heard some of the concerns on who owns the product. We're telling our people, don't sign any agreement where you take ownership of the product until it reaches your farm. If you do, then you're leaving yourself open. Ministers told us that this legislation will make us, or farmers or users, be more aware of who carries our goods and that type of thing. Well, I'm not too familiar with many farmers who tell the manufacturer, the supplier, we want X company to carry these goods. We don't have that kind of bargaining power most often to tell you who's going to carry the goods at our farm. We are going to do some positive things, I think, and the legislation will do this, so maybe some trade-offs. Farmers are going to have to start to develop preventative maintenance programs. I mean, it's no longer going to be possible that they're going to truck or move chemicals or pesticides, insecticides or whatever on vehicles or tanks that aren't up to standard. Things that have to be done, maintain that equipment, are going to have to be done today, not tomorrow. You've got hoses, valves, or whatever. If they need to be replaced, they're going to have to be fixed. The risk is too great. You're moving from farm A to farm B, you've got a tank, you know, and oh, well, it's already yesterday, I'm sure I can get this just load to that farm, no problem, you have a spill. Well, that was a heck of a risk, and you've got a problem. So farmers are going to have to develop that type of program. There's nothing in place right now for it. I don't think most of them have. There's going to have to be more instruction in farm labor. Farm labor has to be trained in safe animal foods. I would have to guess the majority of farm labor is just as most farmers have only a limited amount of training. And the insurance issues have been brought up. I won't break the talk too much about that. One comment about it, though, is that it's interesting to see that the insurance companies that are involved in this, the cooperators are one, they're closely allied with the Federation of Agriculture. This pool is set up at arm's length from them. This pool goes down, they're safe. It gives you a warm feeling that the companies are so certain that this is poor legislation, they want nothing to do with it. Sure, they'll set the pool up. Sure, they'll sell the policy. But if the claims are too great, and the pool goes down, they're safe. It doesn't, gives me a feeling that this isn't going to work. If it was going to work, the insurance companies would be there. They're not going to do that. I think we're going to be looking to CACA to work more closely with producers to ensure that there's some safe handling of the use of agricultural chemicals. Those face the word chemical already makes majority of people in the province break out in hives, no matter what it is. We're going to have to perhaps work closely with us or our local federations developing training seminars. It's going to be costly, some of them have to pay for it. I'm sure you'll find the agricultural community very receptive if you put on a training course, not to promote your particular good, but if you put on a training course on safe handling and use and disposal, they'll pay to come. They told us that they'll pay to go to those types of seminars. They'll pay to come to yours. The annual problem, as I mentioned, we're probably going to be asking the ministry to consider some plans that we have in educating farmers on how to handle safely, dispose of safely chemicals and containers, that type of thing. And we may come to you. I'm not going to go into many of the feelings that Mike has expressed. I have too, and we've gone through that and around that tree for 6 or 7 months in the CARE organization. That organization still exists. OTA and OFA, CCPA, OPA, Ontario Petroleum Association. They are still working. In fact, today they're meeting. They are determined to put forward the view that this legislation should be reviewed. They're not content to say the battle is over, we're going to accept it, and we'll endorse it and work with it. They feel that this legislation is perhaps requires a review, and that regardless of the political agreements that were made to put it in place, it will be reviewed. When you think of the wide group that's in that organization, and who they represent, and the fact that they never worked together before, you begin to wonder maybe someone is wrong. Because we have never worked with, or very rarely do we work with OTA, CCPA, OPA. Their interests and ours sometimes are not the same. And this issue, we're all in the same boat. Makes you think that maybe we're right, somebody else isn't. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dale. Anyone have any questions of Dale? I'd like to call upon Helen Gagne again, please, to give us the current status on liability insurance, whether or not we're going to be able to purchase the type of insurance that we need for spills, and what kind of costs and what kind of problems we may expect in the future.
Since we talked about scalability, the pros and cons and everything, I won't deal with that anymore. so far as insurance is concerned. I would like just to get right down to the point and discuss precisely what kind of coverage you're looking for in your type of business and what's available out there or not available. And I want to deal in detail of what's the PLE, since it seems that very few people are aware of what kind of coverage the pool is supposed to provide. In order to determine what kind of policy coverage you're looking for, first you have to know what is your kind of exposure, what's the possibility of an accident, what the kind of accident you would be responsible. And I think the best way to do that is really to take an example, because it's not an easy area. If we take, for instance, the person in control, not the carrier, the person in control, the retailers, the packagers, handlers. You have a loss, let's say, on your property. You have two kinds of exposure. First is the product was packaged and put together and sent out of your shop. And then you have, when you're doing that thing on your own property, and you could have an accident. First, you're looking at your usual liability. What you had before the spill bill has not changed that, whether you're responsible for a loss. Whether the loss strictly affect your own property, or whether the loss damage would spill into the neighbor's property and cause damage to that. That is still there. This has not been amended, has not been changed. This is the first, that's the one thing you always have to have in mind, because there's always a possibility for you that there will be an accident, either caused by yourself, your employers, and getting the packaging, handling, or maybe if you do your own transportation, also the transportation, or when you're responsible for transportation. So you always have to be able to look for coverage for that kind of risk, unless you really have a foolproof system that you ensure you'll never be liable, which I doubt very much nobody could do that. That's the first thing. The second thing, in that area, you will have to determine how much you need, how much type of insurance you would need. To do that, you have to look back at your own experience, how much business you have, how much products you take out of your shop. The kind of, that's what you have to determine. Do you need 1 million, 5 million, 10 millions? Are you dealing in exportation? That's another thing. Are you limited to Ontario only or transporters? That's another area. And finally, your own experience and losses and so on. Here I'm talking about depending on your loss control system, your emergency program you have within your own company, the planning, security, and so on. This all has an impact with the type of liability possibly you could have personally. So that's the first risk. First is there. Still, bill is totally different from that. It has no impact. Now we're looking at the second type of insurance you're looking for as directly resulting from the spill bill. This is the cleanup cost, where you're going to be personally liable, absolutely liable in all cases. And here I think there's a lot of confusion as to why you would need that, because you're not responsible. There's a mix up about what's absolute liability and so on and so forth. We'll ignore the farmers for the moment because of the special limits, but we'll take just the retailers or packagers. You know that if you are not responsible for a loss within your own shop or your product, or as an owner or a person in control, that you will at some point in time be able to go to the department, the ECC, and ask for recovery of your costs of the cleanup and restorations and whatever you've done yourself or you were ordered by the government to do. Now that's where it turns back on you. You're allowed to go back and be reimbursed, but whenever you make a request for reimbursement, as was mentioned briefly this morning, the government will always come back and on whatever bill you're putting in for as an invoice for recovery, they will always deduct what we call in the jargon and in the law a specified deductible. That specified deductible, that's where it's at $1 million plus 10% of your the capital value. That's the portion which you will never be able to get back from the government. And that's the portion you have to protect yourself or whenever you are not responsible for the loss. Because if you don't get protection or insurance for that layer, this means it's going to come out of your own pocket, or you're going to have to go and see the third party responsible and seek to be able to collect from whoever caused the mess, the loss, whatever it is. So that's why in this case, and this is always long, it's not easy to prove, and who says that the third party will have any money to reimburse you anyway. So this is what we call the area where the PLA, or the Pollution Liability Association Insurance, is supposed to come in and help you to some extent. So that I would like to make it clear, this is only for when you are not responsible for a loss, but there is a loss, and you want to be able to recover back from the government, whatever it is. Let's say, for instance, this $2 million cleanup, it might look very exaggerated today, but we're talking on a long term here. We're not talking on today's figures. Who knows how much it's going to cost, in 5 or 10 years from now to clean up the environment. It depends on our experience, it depends on the inflation, it depends on technology and everything else. So this is what we're talking about here, that $1 million, which is a direct result from the spill bill. Now, there's another thing I would like us to specify here earlier. I think it's Mike mentioned that $1 million was as a result of the recommendation of the panel, the advisory panel on the regulations. Now, I would like just to give them one little plus on that panel. They were not the one who brought up the $1 million. The panel recommended a 3-layer system, which was rejected by the government. They recommended initially something like 200,000, I think, and then they said in 87 could be 400,000 and 89 another layer. They wanted to be able to make it much lower and gradual in order that the insurance would be able to provide that coverage. But that was rejected by the government, and they brought in the $1 million with the 10%. So I just want to make this correction. Initially, in the regulation of 79, the amount was $400,000 plus a 40% calculation, which was really impossible to figure out. So this is the situation right now. This $1 million is, of course, for the cleanup. You are also responsible for bodily injury and property damage on the strict liability, which means that you have a reason to not, you would have a defense. If you prove that you were not negligent to some extent, like you did you did whatever was reasonable, in your capacity, you would not be responsible for bodily injury and other property damage other than cleanup costs. Or if it was something that was totally out of your control, for instance, sabotage or things like that extreme, of course you would not be responsible for that. These losses, as was explained earlier, the government is responsible up to $500,000. So, just going back on your choice, like I mentioned earlier, your first item of personal liability, don't forget that. When you're personally responsible for the spill, not only do you have to clean up, but also if you're responsible and there's a large cost of cleaning up, the government will also be able to come back against you as a responsible party and try to be reimbursed for their expenses too. So there is a real need to be covered, to cover yourself in case you are responsible and in case you are not responsible. The limits are different. I want to make these two distinctions. Now, the next question, of course, is where can you get that kind of insurance? Presently, today, as of January 23, there might be 3 types of insurance on the market. And this is an area where there's a lot of competition. Every company is coming up with its own package. The brokers are doing their own package. It depends whether you're dealing with mutuals or with co-ops or with direct riders and so on. There's all kinds of permutations and everything. In the liability insurance, in general, there's absolutely no control. Everybody is dreaming up its own package and variants and protection whatsoever. So there's all kinds of things out there. But generally speaking, there are 3 types of insurance which could be there to deal with pollution. Pollution insurance would be the kind of thing we're talking about. In prior 1986, and you might be covered still right now with that old coverage, what we refer to as CGL, which means Comprehensive General Liability Insurance. These policies in general were covering pollution if it was sudden and accidental. That was part of the package. If you had the CGL as a business, you had that coverage automatically. Unless, there was such a bad accident record in your company that the broker was aware and it would make the company aware of it and they would just cross it out. But generally speaking, that coverage was available. what is happening, is happening right now, 8586 in U.S. and Canada, is that all the forms have been redrafted. And for once, the company seems to be following pretty much the same type of forms. And they're pushed by the reinsurance market also to follow the same forms. And they're removing that kind of coverage which used to be available in the past, the sudden and accidental. They say, no, we will not offer that anymore as automatically. You will be able to get it on a one-to-one basis only, in other words, by endorsements. You will have to negotiate that with the brokers and the companies. So that's the new situation right now. That's why if somebody has renewed a contract, I would say probably after November 85, that you are probably in that situation, that you don't have pollution insurance, unless your broker has told you that you do have it. So you should check that with your broker to make sure that you have what kind of coverage you have, so far as pollution is concerned. Now, as I mentioned, if you could buy that, and it's going to be a real tug-of-war or bargaining situation. Whether you're going to get it or not will depend on the size of your business, will depend how long you've been with that insurance company. It will depend also on the type of experience you've had, and then maybe they will start from there and start to negotiate the price. They might ask you, for instance, they will offer the pollution coverage, but if you take a higher deductible. Or they will say, well, we'll offer you certain type of pollution coverage, but not the whole thing. They might want to split your type of business. For instance, if you're in products, packaging and so on, and you do some exportation, they might refuse covering you for exportation to the United States because that's where the problem is. So this is the kind of thing you might be able to negotiate. They'll try to break down your policy coverage, which was rarely done in the past. This is one way to be able to try to get some insurance. They might say, well, are you willing to take a higher deductible in certain type of risk, and we will cover you for the rest. And it's purely a situation of negotiation, just like labor contracts and everything. So this is the area we're at, and this is where it's very important for you to have a good broker, because very few companies have, some companies have their own direct agents, but in general, private insurers are dealing through the brokers who are supposed to be independent, and it's their profession to try to find you some coverage somewhere. Now, if that doesn't work, we're talking here about what was set up in December, or still in the process right now, the Pollution Liability Association. What that is doing is strictly offering you limited pollution insurance. And I'm going to tell you limited and compare what the spill bill is asking and whether it's offered or not under this insurance. I have here some people who didn't know where it stands. Well, there's a circular here dated December 20, 1985. Which was sent to all insurers in the province and brokers. I got a copy also, explaining what the purpose of it, how it's going to work, who's a member of it. There are 25 insurers right now. Giving a copy of what we call application form, which is the details of what's going to be asked from you to be able to determine whether you're insurable with them or not, and a copy of the policy. Now, this Pollution Liability Association is not an insurer set up, it's a reinsurance. That's why somebody said earlier that if they go belly up, or the thing doesn't work, where do we stand? Well, there's no problem to that extent, and if there's plenty of where it's going to work like this, let's say I'll take just, the biggest, let's say the co-op. Somebody mentioned co-op, so I'll just keep using the co-op. You're no problem, you're members of IBC, so there's no difficulty. Let's say one of you is insured with a co-op, has been services with them and so on. You want to have some liability insurance. The co-op figures that according to their book of business, they cannot provide you with insurance, pollution insurance themselves personally. They say, okay, fine. We're going to provide you with the insurance which is available to the PLA, Pollution Liability Association. What it means is this, is that the co-op will issue you a policy with their name on the policy. You don't have a certificate if you want to. You have but what the co-op will issue is that they will take the whole package of insurance and they will go and see the association and they will reinsure it with that association. You know, you won't know about it because on your policy form it says co-op as insured. But it means that if there's a risk, or if, let's say you have a spill, you will deal with co-ops, but co-ops then will turn around and will go and see that group, that pool of companies, and the pool will make the payments, and the pool is made up of 25 insurance companies. That's why they could spread the risk this way. So every time one of you will have a spill with a company which is dealing with the pool, and even now, right now it's not restricted, it's true, it's everybody. If you were provided that policy coverage, the 25 member companies will turn around and pay the bills. So it's very, I don't think it's possible for them not, you might have one company, maybe out of 25 who might go bankrupt for some other reason, but still you have the other members who will pick it up. So once it's set up, the purpose is really for that function. But because they're taking the risk, because those 25 companies are taking the risk of paying the bills all the time, they set up their own conditions. And their own conditions to deal with them is this. They have a specific policy and nobody is allowed to change one word in it. It's very, very specific as to what kind of coverage they're doing. They are setting up the rates themselves and nobody is allowed to change the rate whatsoever. There's no negotiation with them. They will classify your type of business in about 9 classification, I believe. And will be all part of a manual. And depending on your type of business, if you fall into category 1 to 5, you pay so much, and 5, 6, and 7, you pay so much. And that's it. There's no negotiation whatsoever possible with them. So it's pretty restrictive. Over and above that, they have established a system of inspection to be able to help them determine the rates and determine who should qualify for this or not. They have a system of inspectors which will be required in all cases before you would have access to them. Let's say co-op comes today with one XYZ company and says, well, we'd like you to reinsure that company, that company. The pool has the discretion to turn it down. They don't have to take everything. It's not like what I was talking about this morning in the facility, where the facility association has to take everybody, good, bad, or indifferent. It's not the case with this pollution association. They have the right to refuse it. They could refuse for any reason. If they look at the record of the company and they see that it has a very bad record in the past, they'll just reject it right off the bat. If the question is that they don't know how much to charge or which category to classify you, they will require an inspection by engineers, pollution engineers. And that's where there's a snag right now because there's very few of those around in Canada. There's quite a few in the States, but there's very few of them in Canada. So we have to train the people and tell them how to do it and everything. So they will require an engineering pollution inspection, which will be done at your own cost. That's going to be part of the package and everything. And if after that, after this, they might tell you, listen, you should improve your handling, your packaging, your machinery, or whatever. They could give you advice on how to improve the situation in order to lower your level of risk. Or they could say, okay, we're satisfied with the way you operate, and we're going to insure you at a premium so much. But you will not be dealing directly with them to that extent. It will always go through your co-op or insurance company. It's a reinsurance, but with a lot of control. And if there's a claim, they will provide the expertise to clean up. They will be involved in directing how it's going to be done and everything. So this is really how the pool will work. And as I said, they don't have to take everything. They pick and choose. And you have to find out about those only through your broker or the insurance company. What this pool will offer you in a very fixed manner is a $1 million, nothing less except for the farmer, nothing more. $1 million. So your 10%, which I mentioned to you earlier, which you will never recover from the department when you're not responsible, you will not get it from this. Because they fixed the amount of $1 million. I'm going to tell you one. One of the reasons is that when we drafted this thing, we didn't have the regulation either. And we were told by the government that the limit would be $1 million. We said, okay, fine, we're going to work with $1 million. But when we got the regulation, there was that 10% added on, and there was no way we were going to change it when the whole thing was done. So now we'll offer a limit of $1 million per accident and $2 million aggregate, which means that irrespective of the number of claims or accidents in the 1 year, it will pay up to $2 million. Just to give you an example of what they cover, you have to deal with what we define as a pollution incident. And it doesn't go as far as a spill bill. What they cover is an unexpected and unintentional discharge, so that's not bad, of any pollutants. Pollutants is defined pretty much like a spill bill. From or out of a structure or container. So here, if you have something you dump in your backyard and it rots, or after some years it spills and there's a discharge that goes into water, that's not covered. It would strictly have to be from a structure or container. A structure would be a building, a container, a container. Provided that such discharge is detected by any person within 120 hours after the commencement of the discharge. 120 hours is what? It's 5 days. Yeah. Why it's 5 days? This is to give you a chance that you have a long weekend, if something happens over the long weekend, you find it out on your Tuesday or Monday or Tuesday morning, something happens Friday, at least, you have to be there after all. There's only so much you can do. So if you discover, that's going to be covered. The discharge must result into an environmental damage. If there's no environmental damage, this will not cover. You could have accidents, you can have explosions, for instance. But for some reason, there's no environmental damage, which is also defined to be something done to the environment and so on and so forth. Even if you have an explosion as a result of your toxic chemicals, which work for some reason, it does not cause damage to the environment. This does not protect it. You will have to look at your normal insurance for that. Then such discharge does not occur in a quantity over the quality that is routine or usual to the insurer's operation. We go back to the spill bill here. Like we said, the spill bill is something which is unusual and in larger quantity than it's normally you want to do. In other words, if every Friday night you put a fire in the chimney or whatever, and you spurt up a lot of guts through the chimney and so on, if you do that on a regular basis, that's routine. That's not covered here. It has to be accidental, unexpected. The entirety of any discharge which arises out of a continuous or repeated exposure to substantially the same conditions is deemed to be one pollution. So if you have several blurts over the same week, you don't have 5 spills, we'll presume that it's one spill. That's worth the limits of the policy. So generally speaking, that's what it's going to do. Now let's go to the exclusion. There are about 10 or 12 exclusions, which is, you would say, is normal in policy. You always have to read the fine print because that's where you know whether you're insured or not. The most important exclusions you have, first is that this coverage is available for discharge or spill in Canada only. So if for some reason you would have, let's say you're not much involved in transportation, but let's say for some instance you are involved in transportation and your truck is a spill in the States. Or let's say you're just at the limit at the border and you have a spill which goes into the States. The policy will not cover any damage caused in the United States. We want to stay out of the U.S. totally because it's a totally different volume. That's the first thing. The million you have. One big exclusion which is important is the underground storage. There's absolutely no coverage for any underground storage, any spill coming out of underground storage. And that is too close to waste disposal for our taste. That's very expensive. That is always hard to determine when it started and what for and everything. So if you have any waste, please don't put them in underground storage because you will not have insurance. And right now this is the worst area. Everything which is underground, nobody wants to touch it. Because of the difficulty in assessing what's your responsibility, what is not your responsibility. No gradual discharge, other than what I said here. No damages to water is covered. If you have some stuff going in the water or lake or river or anything, that's not supposed to be covered. Covered on the surface of the ground only. No property damage, cleanup, or bodily injury, or I should say no property damage or cleanup, which you might be ordered by the department to do on your own property. This will never be covered. This never covers a loss which occurs on your own premises, and you had to clean up by order of the government or by reason of the law, which might very well happen. And here we are really on fine lines. You might find companies which will be willing to cover that as a prevention of further damages. Let's say you have a spill on your own property, and the best way for you to confine it and to make sure that it doesn't spill on your neighbor's property is to clean up on your own property. You might be able to, it's possible that companies in some circumstances will say, yes, sure, it's really a preventive measures, was the right thing to do. Might as well pay you now and pay 3 times the price tomorrow because you didn't clean it up. So in some cases, they'll be on the borderline. There's another thing which the spill bill asks is the way that you find the cleanup responsibility, where you're supposed to not only clean up and contain and also prevent future losses, but also to restore. This is one area which the insurers did not want to be involved because they said, what is restoration? Restoration, as an example, could be this. You have a spill in a farmer's or in an area, let's say, it could be a farmer's field, it could be a truck or anything else. You clean it up, you dig out. You dig out whatever stuff is a pollutant. To restore would mean to put back, the earth on the topsoil, the good fertilizers in the trees and whatever it needs. That's a restoration. Now they say we don't mind to clean up, we don't mind to confine, but there's no way we're going to restore. Now this is not too sure. We don't say that in policy. We say, well, it's going to be a question of discussion every time. If it's property damage, let's say the farmers could say, he says, I've lost all that crop and everything. Where the damage occurred, there was a good crop which was supposed to come out, and now it's gone because of your spill. Well, this is property damage. I know it's very technical, but you have to know these things to be able to bargain. They might say, okay, fine, this is property damage. We feel that it's a fair and legit claim. We're going to pay it, even though it means restoration. So it's a give and take type of thing. The other thing which is not provided in the policy and of which you are responsible under the spill bill, what they did when they defined property damage, they also included economic loss. And that's dangerous. Now you wonder, that means this, is that, for instance, we go back to the Kenora spill, which everybody's aware of now. They blocked a whole sections of the highway. Now you had all kinds of people stopped in that section. We know because we got the claims. You had motels in that area, you had all kinds of small business, you had all kinds of truckers and carriers of any sort which were stuck there. They couldn't move because the road was blocked. Now everybody in that stretch, which were not directly affected, they were not injured, they did not have property damage, their truck could still move around, but they were stuck there. Those people who lost money as a result of that order to close that road, they could come back to you and say, directly as a result of the spill, I have lost so much money. My truck was on the standby. I lost wages. I lost this and that. They could come back and make a claim for that, and you are responsible for that, according to the spill bill. So this is the kind of, and this, the PLE policy will not cover it, because you get all kinds of far-fetched claims like that, and we've seen it in the Mississauga derailment. So that's why I want you to know what's covered, what's not covered. And that's why I say it's very limited. It doesn't mean that it won't change later on, there's things and so on. But this is the initial policy right now. They said we don't want to touch that because it's too open to abuse. They didn't want to touch that. So I think, in general, that's pretty much what this policy will do or not do. I think it's most important for you to find out what it will not do. Now, at what stage is the association? I know some people complain that the minister said in November 29, it's in place. Well, the only thing which was in place was an interim type of board of directors. The policy was not drafted, or there were all kinds of things missing anyway. To have before the policy could be issued and sent out on the market, it's like any other products. If you want to make a can of something, you have to fix the containers, you have to set up how the product will be sold and how it's going to be marketed and everything and the price. So this is the same. That's the thing which is missing right now. I had a meeting, I think yesterday or the day before, with people who are directly involved in this PLA. And apparently the manual should be sent to the brokers and everybody should be available. With the policy is already there, available, that you could get. If somebody, some of you wants to see it, they could ask their broker to give you a copy of it, and they should have it. It's available. The policy is available, the conditions and applications are available. The only thing missing right now is that big book, which will give the classification of risk and the premium. That's what's missing. And they said that they have finalized that and they should be able to move ahead. Which means that in the meantime, if your policy was renewed, as I said, November 85, which is a good guess, you really don't have coverage for pollution, for spill, or anything. That's the danger of it. Because when this thing comes out, and when your broker or insurance company is ready to sell it, it won't be retroactive. We didn't say that in the policy. That is something the government was hoping for, that we would date everything back to November 29. We said, no way, we can't do that. So the policy, the sooner you get it, the better. The sooner you get to your broker to really put your name on the list or find you a carrier in the meantime. That's the main thing. The better you do it. And the carriers are fixed carriers or insurance companies. The list of 25 of them doesn't mean that nobody else will provide it. It just means that these people have put money in the pool themselves personally, and they're directly involved in the administration and managing it. The brokers could still use some other companies, and they could have access to this pool. So I don't want to list the companies here. Some people want to. I could list it, but I don't think it's necessary. If there's any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. Yes.
I know I asked you earlier, but could I just run through an example, see if I'm understanding this correctly? Now, per se, my company, I have a spill. It's not my fault. I have to clean it up. Then I send this agency the bill for cleaning it up. They're going to deduct $1 million plus 10% of my assets from that bill.
That's right.
Is that correct?
Well, this is one way. It will be looked at. There's all kinds of other conditions, but that's one of the major ones.
Okay, but what if it, okay, so if the spill cost $2 million, and let's say my assets were $1 million, so it's going to cost 1.1, that's what the actual bill is going to be. They're going to deduct 1.1. There's $900,000 left that my company is responsible for?
If you're not responsible for the loss, it would mean that you would have yourself to go around and try to find from the party at fault, try to recover your $900,000, that's right. In the meantime, you paid it out of your own pocket, and it's up to you now to go and get and collect that from whoever was responsible for the loss, that's right.
Okay, but not only that, that $1 million, or that deductible, does not cover all these things that you just told me about. All this stuff, no spills in Canada, no coverage in underground storage, these things you just told us.
That's right.
So on top of that, let's say it cost my company $2 million, but $1 million of those dollars were involved in repairing, let's say, water pollution and cleanup on my own property and restoration and all that. I'm out that yet.
That's right.
But I can't get insurance from this new PLA to cover that. So where am I going to find insurance to cover that section that's not covered by nobody?
That's why that's why I mentioned the first thing. You have to find it on the normal market of pollution, not the PLA. The PLA will not get involved into that. You have to go on the normal market and try to find some companies, or God knows what. I know it's not easy right now. Some companies to be able to provide you insurance for that general liability insurance. But you're not responsible, you said here? Are you responsible?
No, I'm just using not responsible right
now. Not responsible.
Then I'll ask about the other way around. Okay, I was not responsible. I'm finding out that the more not responsible I am, the more responsible, the more money it's going to cost.
Yeah, it's true, because that 10%.
And now, if I am responsible, I still cannot go to this PLA association, and all these exclusions are still in effect, whether I'm responsible or not.
No, if you're responsible, they will cover it because it's a direct result. You're responsible. You see, we have to look at two things: the tort responsibility and the spill bill responsibility. The PLA purpose is really to provide both. What we call tort, which is your normal negligence, where you're responsible in the sense you talked about, and the second one is when you're responsible by reason of the law, which is a spill bill. It will provide you both coverage.
Would give me both coverages?
Yes.
But with exclusions on both?
The exclusions are on both, yes. And you see, you have two coverage in the PLA. One is the normal tort coverage, and the other one is the cleanup cost. Cleanup cost is insured specifically separate in this thing. But the exclusions I mentioned to you are with respect to everything.
So to protect myself, I will actually have to go out, as we said here before, and determine my exposure, what damage I can do to myself, the property around me, where, let's say, I deliver chemicals and who it may spill beside, and then add $1 million plus 10% of my assets, at least.
No, absolutely.
That's the absolute minimum to that figure, and then try and get insurance for it.
Yeah.
You.
And unfortunately, right now, there's such a tight market, it's very difficult. There's very few liability insurers out there right now who are willing to do anything in pollution area. I just hope it's going to be a short period of time.
A statement was made earlier today that the reason for the high rates for liability insurance and, in fact, the inability to supply it was because of bhopal and things like this. Is this fact?
It's only a part of the fact. There's so many things. It's only one of the many elements. And the bhopal and those things affect the reinsurers. The reinsurers, which are outside Canada, were involved in those claims when you had the lost satellites and everything seems to happen in 85. And the reinsurers who were involved in all these losses say there's only so much money left in the pot to reinvest in the liability insurance. And they just make it tight, and the cost to provide that kind of protection to Canadian insurers or American, the insurers had to take that into consideration and ask for higher premium from their own direct clients. It's a snowball effect from the top down, and then it goes way up again. All comes from the same pocket. It comes from the insurer, and he's the one who has to, he's the one, unfortunately, has to carry the whole, the ripple effect of the international market. This is the way they work. There are very few reinsurance companies in Canada. Very few. Yes?
I don't know if you can answer this, maybe one of the other panelists can understand. Does CARE lobby the judicial system at all to possibly bring down the judgments that are being given out? Because that's probably the big problem that started all this problem. Is CARE the lobbying the judicial system at all?
CARE group. The CARE group?
Yes.
The CARE group is only lobbying on the spills bill at this point.
Maybe I should explain here that the spill bill, the problem with judicial right now deals with bodily injuries. The spill bill, you have very, very few claims involving bodily injuries, and we could see that. You could have a spill, you could have a turnover of a truck, and you could have two drivers and a car with 4 members of the family killed. But they're killed not because of the spill, they're killed because of the accident, the collision. So, generally speaking, except we see a bhopal, which could happen here, or a 3 Mile Island, generally speaking, there are very few bodily injuries in spills. So that's why the judicial, which is really to give high indemnities in bodily injuries, might be very secondary. It doesn't mean that it won't change though. But that's probably why the same thing for the insurance company. So far the spill bill is concerned, we did not really touch much on the BI. We're not concerned very much on that. We are doing that on the other side in general for liability. It's one of the main thrusts of our present investigations and study with the government right now to deal with the judicial and bodily injury and the impact it has on everything else.
at least Helen corrected me on one of my misconceptions about the pool, which is good. I won't go around the countryside saying it can go broke. Maybe you could tell me, Helen, if the pool does show poorly, if the claims are high, and it is showing high, is there any requirement from the 24 or 25 insurance companies that are in it now that they have to stay in it for 3 to 5 years? Or can they go on a year-to-year basis and say, look, claims rate is bad, I think we're going to get out? Because that was really my background with the comment. The claims rate is bad, they're not going to stay in and continue to offer insurance coverage if they feel this is going to be bad in their company.
The way we set it up initially is that we sent some kind of undertaking, a document to each insurance company asking them if they wanted to participate in the pool and how much they were willing to put in, a percentage of some sort, 2, 5, not $1, but the percentage status then. And I believe at the last, I might be wrong, but the way it is right now, we're going to read, it's supposed to be an open-end type of thing, but they're allowed to give us notice of 60 days to pull out. So it's not that it's in a year from now until the pool will be gone, but you could have a flood or a withdrawal if the city experiences that and then would like to pull out. And that means that all the others who are left, they're left with a bag, and that would really create a hardship. That's the danger of it. But then they have to put some reserves and so on. It's a strange situation right now, I must say. Yes.
Aren't we dealing here with a worst case scenario, something that's totally unreal for what we've seen in the past? Because really what we're dealing with is insurers who are outside the country who are insuring things like the satellites that go wheeling off into space at a couple of $1 billion, and they're throwing the insurance for this industry and for this area totally out of whack with what's real. And in fact, the insurability has become almost impossible because of that situation, not because of the spills bill or the trucking problems or the pesticide problems or anything.
And it's quite a ripple effect, I agree with you. Let's say, for instance, you would be dealing with a company which is selling 100 products, and out of those 100 products, 25 of them are deadbeats or are the cause of all kinds of problems and everything. And for that reason, it costs the company so much and it breaks the whole book of business right down in the red. That's really what we have right now. And it's unfair for the other products which might be very good, very valuable and everything, very much in demand, but they just cannot afford to sell them anymore because of the ripple effect. That's unfortunately the situation.
Is it possible in the scenarios we're talking about today that you could have a situation where you'd have a train wreck for goods suddenly no one owned? Because let's face it, we've all heard the situation where in the corn futures market they went around with the bins to find out where the corn was and they were empty. But we now have a scenario where all of a sudden no one owned that material.
It's a bit like having a hit and run.
Everybody has fraudulently somehow or other found a way of not owning it.
You will have to go and trace it back as far as you can. The first one you hit is going to get it. If you have a plate or a registration number or anything, it's like any product that's left in a field. If it's abandoned and there's no way for you to trace it back, it's true. We'll be in a situation where, who would handle the package would probably be the government, and they'll do their best to trace it back. Charge truck. A trailer, an empty trailer is all right.
Thank you very much. I think you did an excellent job of filling us in on the insurance situation. Lastly, I'd like to call on Jack Elliott to tell us what's happening with CACA in regards to his bills.
Ladies and gentlemen, just taking off from Doug Gutty's question, I think it is clear what economists told us that the international insurance market is in a state of crisis at the present time through no fault of anybody in Ontario. On the other hand, it is the government of Ontario, through the Spills Bill, that has put a lot of people, a lot of businesses, represented here in this room, in the position of going out and looking for more liability insurance coverage than they've ever needed before, at a time when the market, the availability, the cost of that liability insurance is the worst in history. I said this morning that we were here today to get answers to our questions and find out what the real world is. And we, I think, have had a lot of light shed on that today. As to what CACA is going to do about it, Spills Bill specifically, I really can't say. Until now, we have not had any specific requests from member companies or from users or from anybody really to take any specific action with respect to the Spills Bill. However, some of our ongoing activities and programs do impinge in this general area of responsible care with respect to the environment. And I'd just like to refer to something Dale said. He was up here. He said, mere mention of chemicals these days makes a lot of people, or most people, break their eyes. Unfortunately, that is the world we live in. And while most of us in this room are probably involved in something to do with agriculture, we are very much in the minority in our society. Farmers represent less than 3% of the Canadian population. Those of us in the business of providing inputs to farmers don't really change the percentages very significantly. It means that agriculture, and those of us interested in agriculture, are operating in a predominantly urban environment. It's the urban influence dictates the legislation. Somebody said earlier today that they couldn't quite understand why the Spills Bill was brought in 1985. I think I know the reason it was brought in 1985 was because politicians read polls. They read the Gallup poll, the decimal poll, the Gold Bar poll. The polls are telling them that the voters are demanding there be more action on environmental issues. That is the real world. Our association has a policy of responsible care that includes commitment to taking every practical precaution towards ensuring that its products do not present an unacceptable level of risk to lots of things, including the environment. So, some of the things that we are doing, have been doing, and will continue to do, let's say, impinge in the area that the Spills Bill specifically is intended to address. It's one of the things we've done is hold a seminar so that we all have better information. Also, our association has a Transportation, Distribution, and Container Disposal Committee, and 2 members of that committee are here today, and they may come up with recommendations about what the association should do as a result of what we learned here today. subject next week. Will include the fee structure for participation in TEEP and details of how our association is providing access to that program. The other thing that we're doing is very closely aligned to what we talked about today. The Ontario Council organized this meeting also as a series of meetings ongoing, 8 meetings, training on the transportation of dangerous goods regulations. Most member companies of CACA have trained their own key personnel over the past year and taken the necessary steps to bring their operations in compliance with the transportation goods regulations. And this being the off-season between active agricultural seasons, Ontario Council is providing information to other people in the distribution system. CACA also is developing a manual on warehousing practices for agricultural chemicals, and that will include section on dealing with fires and spills at the warehouse level. Other programs that say create the right climate, an emphasis on responsible care in handling agricultural chemicals, and therefore should also get people thinking in the right way about how to eliminate or prevent spills, include the vendor certification program that CACA has been fostering for the last 3 or 4 years in cooperation with the Ministry of Agriculture and Food and the Ministry of Environment. Similarly, the last 2 years, Ontario Council has had fly-ins for aerial applicators. Again, that's not directly related to spills, but it is creating more emphasis in the whole area of responsible care and prevention of spills. Collectively applauded for that effort. As an association, we have a lot of the raw material for the training program that Dale Firms predicts going to need. We have 5 audiovisual programs on the safe storage, handling, use of agricultural chemicals, and container disposal. We also have brochures, posters to back that up. And our objective as an association is to get 1 brochure, 1 poster in the hands of every farmer, not just in Ontario, but in Canada. A brochure for them to read, and a poster for them to pack up in inspiration. It's readily available every time it goes in there. Use agricultural chemicals. Now, Bill predicts that we will need more formal training for farmers. He's right. Once we get vendor certification established, then farmer training in a more formal way will probably be following close behind. The reason that we started with vendors is that they've long been recognized as having key role in the transmission both of information and additives toward agricultural chemicals. So we started with them, all was to say as part of our strategy of responsible care. And one of the ways that we hope to work with the Ontario Federation of Agriculture and other farm organizations is we are well along with the planning for a get-together in the next month and a half with them at the University of Guelph. Talk about how we can work together. We're going to look at the report of the Ontario Task Force on Health and Safety in Agriculture. It's chaired by Dr. Richards. He has highlighted some areas where agriculture, by that I mean farmers and all those that are interested in keeping farmers in business, need to upgrade care. And I think it's quite clear that if we don't work together and approach that on the basis of voluntary training, that enforcement measures will be the only alternative, and they will be not too far away in the future. So those are some of the efforts that our association is making. I think I've listed 12 items, Mr. Chairman, and there'll probably be more flowing out of that meeting. I'm projecting for about a month and a half now at the University as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jack. I think we've covered very difficult and very important set of topics today, and the guests have done an extremely good job, I think, in enlightening us on these subjects. I would like to ask Jim Myers to come up and present a small token of our gratitude for giving up so much of their valuable time today. And while Jim is doing that, I think we should show our appreciation to our guests once again. Before we clear out, are there any other questions? Or do you like to make any other comments or recaps? Well, if not, thank you very much for coming. We've had a very successful meeting. I guess we've had a turnout of about 160 today. So thank you very much for coming.